For this project, I decided to create actual physical halos that represented the types that we see in medieval artworks. I made them out of some gold metal wire and then just like accessories like stars. I tried at first to solder them together, but something about the gold overlay on the wire, the aluminum wire that I used, made it impossible to solder them. So I settled for a really elaborate twisting, bending, and hammering technique to create them. Um, but I decided to do this because I thought it would be a more interesting, creative way to highlight this element. A lot of the time in these medieval artworks, we see a halo on a figure, and the type of halo that they're wearing will indicate what figure we're looking at. And we can often deduce what kind of narrative that we're looking at based on what type of halo that they're wearing. So I went into some research and found that there are actually way more than I thought, way more different halos than I thought. We typically know like the cruciform halo means that that figure that's wearing it is probably Jesus Christ. But there are many, many more, but I chose to highlight three of them. I did the cruciform halo, the star halo, and the square halo. And then, Dr. Ranieri wanted me to expand upon this and figure out how these would be used actually. And she suggested using them as a didactic tool in the classroom, which I thought was really interesting. And I went in and I did some more research and found that the use of manipulatives and hands-on learning actually stimulates both sides of the brain and leads to better memory retention. So I thought that these would be a great way to help students actually retain information about these different symbols in art, and it could, this is something that could be expanded upon, and we could bring other symbols to life to where they are actually being physically able to be manipulated, held, touched, seen in the round, and that would help students to better learn information about what they were seeing in art. So the first one that I highlighted was a cruciform halo, and I just chose this manuscript depiction of the Pentecost as a representation of how you would see it in medieval art. And something interesting that I found was that in the three sides of the halo, you often see the Greek symbols Omicron, Omega, and Nu, which actually translates to he who is or the being one. So those are an often repeated symbol, and you can see that obviously the halo on the Christ figure up top is very different from those on the bottom, so you can tell that these are being separated both by hierarchy of scale and by the symbols used with them. So this was what I created. It is definitely not as pretty as I would have liked for it to be. And that is my lovely mother, who was very gracious and modeled this halo for me. So that is what would be seen on Jesus Christ. The next one that I highlighted was the star halo, and this was my favorite one to create because you see this almost starburst-like figure with the bolts shooting out from the top and the sides, and you see this a lot actually in high fashion nowadays. When the Met Gala did the I don't remember what the theme was called, but it was something having to do with art history. A lot of figures were seen wearing this type of halo as an accessory to their gowns. So this was just as like a lover of fashion and culture, this was a really interesting one for me to make. But it can be seen represented in a lot of places. I chose to show it in the Ghent altarpiece. And this one is always on the Virgin Mary. Um, and it is either represented by the, I guess, star rays, I don't know what you would call that, shooting out from all sides, or it has 12 stars, which you can actually see. They're kind of like the circle coin looking things on Mary's halo. And the 12 stars, let me grab my notes. It is referencing, it's a biblical allusion to Revelations 12:10, which describes Mary as being crowned with 12 stars. So that's my favorite one. I think it's just very pretty. So I incorporated both of those elements similarly to the Ghent altarpiece of the rods sticking straight out. And then if you can see, there are also very tiny stars, and there are 12 of them on there. And the last one that I chose was a little more obscure, which I thought was really interesting because I had never noticed this. I mean, I'm sure I've seen it in art, but I've never actually noticed it being used. And this is the square halo. So you can see the figure on the left. This is a mosaic of Pope Pascal. He is the figure on the left, whereas the two figures on the right are St. Paul and St. Praxedes. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but they just have a regular circular halo. So the square halo was only ever used in art for a holy figure who was still living at the time. So holy figure would be like a pope or somebody very high up in the papacy, and they had to be living. If it was a deceased person or somebody historical, they would never be shown in the square halo. So I think this one is actually really interesting because it contextualizes the piece to its era and its time period. So you know that this figure was living in 1817, and so you can tell when this piece was created. And so I just think that these halos are, oh, yep, there's the beautiful square halo on my father. But yeah, I think these halos are really interesting in the way they symbolize different figures and the way that they contextualize all these works. But yeah, I'm done. Thank you.